This is Access Tech Live.
And we're back on Access Tech Live. Mark, shall we talk Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it this week?
Do I have to call it X? I'm kind of annoyed with that. Yeah, let's do that. Here's what happened, Stephen, okay, that kind of sparked this conversation was last week because I wasn't here. I said, hey, Shaun, do you mind going on now with Dave Brown to talk about some tech? And he did, and he managed to build up some controversy in my place. Thanks. I really appreciate that. So Shaun Preece is joining us now on the show, of course, the co-host of Double Tap, a podcast that he hosts with you every single day, of course, on AMI Audio as well. Now, Shaun, let's go back to the story for a second here. So X breaks accessibility. They pushed an update, and as a result, screen readers weren't able to read the content unless you obviously put a little bit more effort into it. And this sparked the conversation because you kind of said on Now with Dave, do we even need accessibility teams if they were able to fix this? But honestly, do you think they even would have realized that there was a problem in the first place if it wasn't for the community, pointing it out to them? Don't you think the necessity of having a team in there is to obviously hope to avoid issues like this in the first place?
Well, firstly, Mark, that'll teach you for asking me to stand in for you.
I know.
But secondly, what the crux of the matter is that Elon was right when he bought Twitter and he got rid of the accessibility team. Obviously, he's been proven right. Now, I'm not sure if I actually believe that, but that's was some of the conversation that was, I know, had you worried for a minute. But no, the point that you make that wasn't it just for the community? I mean, it was thanks to the community's action, specifically a thread on AppleViz, actually, who actually went out and contacted Twitter and made them aware. Now, who they contacted wasn't the accessibility team, because there wasn't one, but they did contact the actual software engineers who have their own Twitter handle on their channel, whatever you call it, hashtag XENG, X Engineers. So they reached out to them, and surprisingly enough, I've got to say, they got a response from one of the engineers. So that's how the contact was made, how they were made aware. We're not sure if they weren't aware of the problem anyway, but it was definitely the community's actions that made Twitter aware that there was an issue. You're right.
And you're arguing that basically because they managed to connect to one engineer, that they don't need an accessibility team in the company because it was able to get fixed. I mean, that I look back to the years and years of us trying to encourage companies to take accessibility first. And are you throwing it out the window?
Yes. No, I'm not. No. Look, the point is, and you can't really take this one example and say, okay, so this is the conclusion we can jump to. Of course not. This could have been a pure luck, a pure fluke, a 1 in a million chance that will never happen again. But there's no denying that when the accessibility team was disbanded by Elon, we all said at the time, a terrible idea. That shows such a lack of respect for accessibility. And I'm just starting to think, we're starting to move now that accessibility shouldn't be this separate thing. Even as something in our settings on our smartphone or computers, we're seeing now that accessibility features are moving out of their own little special section, which is purely for disabled people, by the way, and moving more into the general settings. And I'm just wondering, I'm just putting it forward that maybe it's the same in the structure of a company, of a business. Why should an accessibility team or the accessibility department, it always seems to me, just be mopping up? They're retrofitting all the time. They're trying to fix the problems that shouldn't be there. Shouldn't the accessibility team be part of that main team anyway? The disabled people should be part of the main general everyday software coders. Accessibility shouldn't be a separate thing. It should be part of the core of a service, of an app.
Stephen, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm shaking my head here because, quite simply, I know exactly where you're coming from, Shaun. I do. And it's interesting, Mark, something you said at the top there, which was that, isn't it the job of an accessibility team to catch these issues before, say, an app update is released or even an app is released? That's the dream, but that's not the reality. Unfortunately, that's not where we are. And what tends to happen is, as you've just said, Shaun, what the accessibility team often ends up doing is mopping up the mess. We need to change that. That's what we need to do. We actually need to give more prominence to the accessibility teams. And for one simple reason, and that is specialisms. there are good reasons why accessibility teams exist. You as a developer of an app, you cannot know every single thing there is to know about accessibility. You might know some areas, you might know some areas pretty well. I akin it a little bit to healthcare. I think about a general practitioner. You would go to a general practitioner to get advice in that interim stage, that early stage, but that person would not know every single thing about every single disease or illness. So they would send you to a specialist. And that's what you need in development. That's what you need in coding. You need someone you can go to say, look, does this work with, say, voice access or voice control or screen readers or whatever it might be? And, how many times have we seen examples where you have a product that comes along that might work brilliant for a blind person, but then there's terrible contrast. So someone who has low vision really struggles to see the app. And you think, this is because we're not thinking inclusively. We're thinking about one particular thing. And clearly no accessibility team has been involved in this, because then you would have that breadth of knowledge to really dive into to get the knowledge.
I do agree with you.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Mark. Well, no, I do agree with what you're saying there, and absolutely, because I'm coming at this from my own little bubble myself. If something on an app isn't accessible with voiceover, it's not accessible, it's terrible. I don't think about someone who may be using a Switch device to navigate around or something. I'm just looking at it from my pure, my disability. So you are right there. But why is the accessibility team outward facing? Almost. I just get a feeling that it's almost a tick box that, hey, we've got an accessibility team, we care. You have.
Well, do you know why that is? I'll tell you exactly why that is. Because unfortunately, in our world today, there is such a push towards regulation. Now, there needs to be regulation, because clearly a lot of things will not happen without regulation. And I'm not suggesting for a second we don't have it. But what tends to happen is you end up with companies saying, right, look, we're going to be sued here if we don't get this sorted. We're going to have to fix this. And that's a good thing. Okay, you can look at it and say that's a good thing. The problem is then...
It is a good thing.
Well, it is, yes. But then what happens is people can then go to solutions that are not perfect. And I'm thinking about, for example, accessibility overlay companies we've talked about before, where people go to those companies because they offer a solution to all the website issues, perhaps, that make a website more accessible. You can just install this plugin and suddenly your website is fully accessible, although actually maybe it isn't. And that creates new problems and new issues for the companies. So, sometimes these solutions come along through regulation, but what ends up happening is you then use the stick more than the carrot. And I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. But look, that's perhaps a different issue, or an extended part into this issue.
I got to ask you something though, Stephen.
Yeah.
How is an accessibility team in a company, different than a UI team in a company? You look at a company like Microsoft that designs lots of different products and hardware, and there's different elements of the company. There's different groups in the company that are responsible for whatever they're responsible for. So these guys are handling the UI, these guys are handling the coding, these guys are handling this, and then these guys are handling accessibility. What is the problem with that? There's no, if you look at the comparison on a broad basis there, everybody has a piece of the puzzle that they're in charge of and are there to bring their piece of the puzzle into the big picture and to make it all work. And I think an accessibility team is part of that puzzle. And yes, of course, we need to have representation across all of these different elements. And you don't necessarily need to have somebody who's disabled in every part of these companies. Obviously, if someone's qualified, they're qualified. Disabled or not disabled. But going, kind of towards Shaun's conversation, yes, you need to be inclusive, but at the same time, an accessibility team is no different than the UI team, than the coding team, et cetera, et cetera. They should all be working together towards the same goal.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I got to jump in.
Well, I was going to say, he's the one arguing against it, not me.
Yeah.
No, that goes with Stephen's point. And what I was going to say about why is the accessibility team got to be outward facing, I was going to make that exact same point. You have a UI team, you have a AI team, a machine learning team inside the general coders. There's absolutely no reason you couldn't have the accessibility team as part of the streamlined structure of a company, of an app, whatever it may be. But the point being, they are in at development level. As things are being designed, as things are being developed, they're not mopping up. They're not coming saying, hey, here's the final product. Apparently something's wrong with it for disabled people. Fix it. Tell us what's wrong.
Well, look, I'm sorry to say it, guys, but there's one simple solution to this. And I'm sorry to say that after all the years of work I've done in this field, I'm still saying it. It feels like after 20 years I've been still saying the same thing. And that is, employ disabled people. Really simple. Just employ disabled people. Employ more disabled people into your company at all levels, at all experience levels. Don't shoehorn us all into one box and say, this is your accessibility box and that's where you go. Actually allow people to get into the company more widely. And then these issues start to get caught because people pick up on them. Conversations happen. You know, the best advocacy you can ever have for disabled people and, you know, helping challenge attitudes towards disabled people is to put disabled people into work, to give disabled people a chance in the workplace, because that then shows what our capability is.
I agree. Totally agree.
I think we're all in agreement. I think we're all in agreement when it comes to that. And I think that you look at all the conversations we've had with every company in the world, whether the small companies or larger companies, it's about representation. It's making sure that the people are there that are qualified and can actually catch this kind of thing. But think about, I want you to think about this for a second.
Hang on. But yeah, I love that we acknowledge it, and I love that we acknowledge that, and we all say it's a great idea, and I know every company comes on and says, yeah, of course, yeah, sure. Let's employ hundreds of millions of disabled people. And it doesn't happen. That's the problem. We're still having the same argument 20 years on from when I started talking about this. We're still having the same debate. The numbers of disabled people in work who are of working age is woefully low. And that has to be dealt with. It has to be dealt with today. This is something that can be dealt with today. Now, it doesn't change all of this overnight. It's not going to change what happened at X. I think what happened essentially at X was a fluke. I think they found it very quickly. I think this could have been a much worse situation. And what that would have led to, guys, is blind people not being able to access that social media site, being completely blocked off, because that is what happened for 24 hours last week.
And that's the last thing that they need, because they don't need more people not being able to use their service in a time when people are jumping off that service left, right, and center. Shaun, thank you for joining us. I appreciate you causing a stir last week. That was great. I really, they did welcome me back this week, so that was good. Remind people where they can find, of course, Shaun of the Shed is your, of course, video podcast available on YouTube now. Only a couple more episodes left and you're done for the season, because we're going to roll that into Double Tap on YouTube next season, right?
That's right. We're taking over YouTube. Double Tap hits YouTube. Yeah. Can't wait.
Well, we're looking forward to it, and we're going to take a quick break here at Access Tech Live. Coming up, we're diving into the summer with some pretty cool outdoor tech ideas, both new and old, that make the outdoors more tolerable and a little bit easier to deal with. All that and more after a quick break here on Access Tech Live.
Access Tech Live to come. Get involved and have your say at Access Tech Live on social media. We'll be right back.